The aroma of the rich, simmering stew filled the kitchen as I stirred the pot, letting the warmth of the stove seep into my hands. The rhythmic bubbling was almost soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once dominated my life. My teenage son, Ryan, sat at the dining table, hunched over his homework, his pencil tapping lightly against his notebook. It was a quiet evening, one of those rare moments of peace I had come to cherish. After everything, after the divorce, the battles, the sleepless nights, I had finally built something steady, something safe. Then came the knock. No, not a knock, an intrusion. The front door burst open as if the hinges meant nothing, and there they were. Julia, my ex-wife, and her mother, Brenda. The moment I saw them standing in the doorway, I knew this wasn't a social call. Julia strolled in like she still owned the place, her smirk sharp enough to cut. Brenda followed closely behind, arms folded across her chest, her face twisted in the same disapproving glare she had worn the entire time I had been married to her daughter. I set the wooden spoon down slowly, inhaling deeply through my nose. Ryan lifted his head from his homework, eyes flickering with caution. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice deliberately calm, though my pulse had already started to drum in my ears. Julia took another step forward, completely ignoring the tension that had settled into the air like a thick fog. "We have unfinished business." I could already feel the bile rising in my throat. Unfinished business. I knew exactly what that meant. It always came back to money. To them, everything was about money. Ryan stood up, his chair scraping against the tiled floor. He looked from me to them, his teenage bravado barely masking the unease beneath. "Dad, do you want me to call Grandpa?" Brenda let out a snort, her eyes rolling like I was some joke. "Oh, please. You think your father can hide behind his parents forever?" I clenched my jaw. I didn't need this. Not here. Not in my parents' home, the one place that had taken me in after everything crumbled. I turned to Ryan, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "No, son. I've got this." Julia sighed dramatically, as if she were the victim here. "You walked away from a marriage, Sam, but you don't just get to walk away from everything else. You owe us." "Owe them? Owe them what?" Years of my life spent trying to please a woman who never wanted me for anything other than what I could provide. Endless sacrifices, sleepless nights, giving until I had nothing left. I could feel my hands ball into fists at my sides, my nails pressing into my palms, grounding me. "You need to leave. Now." Brenda stepped forward this time, her voice dripping with the entitlement that had always grated on me. "You think you can just leave my daughter and pretend none of this happened? Actions have consequences." I let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You're right. Actions do have consequences. And one of those consequences is that you're no longer a part of my life." Julia's smirk faltered, if only for a second, before she steadied herself. "Sam, don't be stupid. You think you can raise Ryan without me in the picture? Without financial obligations?" Ryan, who had been silent up until now, stepped closer to me, his presence solid beside mine. "My future doesn't include you," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. It was in that moment that I saw it. Not the scared little boy who had once tiptoed around his mother's moods, not the child who had worried about keeping the peace. No, this was my son, standing beside me, making his stance clear. Brenda scoffed, throwing her hands in the air. "You've poisoned him against his own mother." Ryan squared his shoulders. "No, she did that all on her own." Julia's eyes darkened, and I could tell she was fighting to keep her composure. There was no winning this argument. They had come expecting me to fold, to crumble the way I used to. They wanted me to give them what they wanted, to fall into the same old patterns of appeasement. But that man was gone. "You should leave before I call the police," I said, my voice level, no longer laced with the anger I once carried. I was done fighting with them. Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew she had lost. Without another word, she turned on her heel, Brenda right behind her, still muttering under her breath about how ungrateful I was. As the front door slammed shut behind them, I exhaled. Slowly, deliberately. The weight of their presence lingered for a moment before dissipating, like a storm that had passed but left behind the smell of rain. Ryan turned to me, his expression uncertain. "Dad, what did they mean about money?" I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. "They're trying to stir up trouble. They're bitter about the divorce, and now they think they're entitled to something that was never theirs to begin with." Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "They won't stop, will they?" I met his gaze, the truth heavy on my tongue. "No, but we'll deal with it. Together." He seemed to take comfort in that, but I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The house had finally settled into silence, but my mind remained restless. The confrontation with Julia and Brenda replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't shut off. Their audacity, their entitlement, their assumption that I still owed them something. It was enough to send my blood pressure skyrocketing. But more than that, it was the way Ryan had looked at me afterward, that lingering question in his eyes. What did they mean about money? I had brushed it off for his sake, but the truth sat in my chest like a weight. Julia had drained me for years, emotionally, mentally, financially, and even after the divorce, she still believed she had some claim over me. I should have expected it. I should have been prepared, but it never stopped being infuriating. I was halfway through clearing the dishes when I heard Ryan's voice behind me. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I turned, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel, noting the unease in his expression. "What is it, son?" Ryan hesitated, shifting on his feet. His eyes darted to the table, the floor, anywhere but me. Finally, he took a deep breath, like he was bracing himself. "It's about Mom." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "Go on." He swallowed hard. "Before you and Mom divorced, I saw her with another man." The words landed like a punch to the gut. I felt my pulse quicken, my grip tightening on the edge of the counter. "What?" Ryan bit his lip. "A few months before everything happened, I saw them at a cafe. They were holding hands." I stared at him, my mind working to process his words. It wasn't that I hadn't suspected it before. I had. Julia's late nights, her guarded phone, the way she had become so distant, so cold. But hearing it from my son, knowing that he had seen it with his own eyes, made it real in a way that nothing else had. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan's eyes filled with something close to guilt. "I was scared. I didn't want to make things worse." Worse. My son had been carrying this burden alone, believing that telling me would somehow make an already broken situation even more unbearable. I exhaled slowly, stepping forward, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Ryan, listen to me. This is not your fault. You did nothing wrong." His jaw tightened. I felt like I should have said something, but I didn't know how. I thought maybe you already knew. I had known something was off, but I had wanted to believe, needed to believe, that I was wrong. That Julia's coldness was temporary. That she was just unhappy, not unfaithful. But here was the truth, laid bare. "Do you remember what he looked like?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. Ryan nodded, his brows knitting together. "Yeah, I saw them more than once. It wasn't just at the cafe. There was another time at the mall." My chest ached. He had been watching, silently witnessing his mother betray me, carrying that knowledge alone. I clenched my jaw. "Do you remember his name?" Ryan hesitated before finally nodding. I heard her say it once. "Marcus." The name hit me like a slap. I felt a cold wave wash over me as I connected the dots. Marcus. He wasn't just some random guy. He had been a friend. Not a close one, but someone I had known. Someone I had once trusted. I took a deep breath, willing the anger to stay beneath the surface. Losing control wouldn't help Ryan. I needed to be steady, for him. I met his gaze, my grip firm on his shoulder. "Thank you for telling me, Ryan." His face was a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "What are we going to do, Dad?" I exhaled, my mind racing. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Julia and Marcus get away with it. Not anymore. "We're going to find the truth," I said, my voice steel. "And we're going to make sure they face the consequences." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Determination, maybe even anger. He had spent too long feeling powerless, just like I had. I gave his shoulder one last squeeze before letting go. Get some rest, son. I'll take care of this. He hesitated, then nodded, turning toward his room. But before he disappeared down the hall, he turned back. Dad? I looked at him. I'm glad it's just us now. His words hit me harder than I expected. I forced a small smile. Me too, Ryan. As his door shut behind him, I sank into a chair, my hands clasped together as I stared at nothing. Marcus. Julia. The betrayal I had once tried to push aside was roaring back with a vengeance. I had let Julia walk away from the marriage without demanding the full truth. I had let her manipulate the situation, twist the narrative, make me feel like I was the problem. But now, with Ryan's confession, the pieces were falling into place. And I wasn't going to let her win. I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving on instinct. There was only one person I could trust to help me dig into this. Adam. I scrolled to his number and hit call. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. Sam? Everything okay? I stared at the table, my pulse still thrumming with anger. Adam, I need your help. A pause. Then, what's going on? I took a breath, steadying myself. Julia was cheating before the divorce, and I need proof. Adam sighed on the other end. Are you sure you want to open this door? I thought about Ryan, about the way he had carried this secret alone. I thought about Marcus, sitting across from my wife, smiling, knowing he was tearing my family apart. I thought about Julia, walking into my home tonight, still believing she had power over me. Yes, I said firmly. I need to do this. For Ryan. Adam didn't hesitate. All right, I'll see what I can dig up. As I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Julia and Marcus thought they had one, but they had no idea what was coming. The weight of Ryan's words sat heavy on my chest long after he had gone to bed. The house was silent, but my mind was loud, spinning through every moment of my marriage, every late-night argument, every cold glance, every unanswered question that I had once forced myself to ignore. Marcus. Julia. The betrayal was a wound that had never fully healed, and now that Ryan had given me the missing piece, it had ripped open again. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as I stared at the ceiling. The anger was there, simmering beneath my skin, but I forced myself to keep it in check. Losing my temper wouldn't get me the answers I needed. I had already made the call to Adam, and if there was anyone who could uncover the truth, it was him. Still, I couldn't sit around and wait. The clock read a little past midnight, but I was too restless to sleep. Instead, I walked over to my desk and powered on my laptop. If Julia had been siphoning money from me for years, as I now suspected, then there had to be a trail. Bank statements, transactions, something had to be there. I opened my online banking history and started scrolling through the records. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then I noticed the transfers. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there. But as I went further back, the numbers increased. 300, 500, 1,000, and all of them had been sent to an account I didn't recognize. I exhaled through my nose, my grip tightening on the mouse. She had been doing this for years. The realization sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I pushed it down. Anger alone wouldn't fix this. I needed more. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to Adam. Me, I found something. Bank transfers. Looks like she was moving money for years. The reply came almost instantly. Adam, send me screenshots. I'll see what I can dig up. I did as he asked, sending every questionable transaction I found. Then I sat back and waited, my knee bouncing with impatience. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Adam, this is bad, Sam. That account isn't in her name. It's in Marcus's. My breath caught in my throat. Marcus. Not only had she cheated on me, but she had been giving him my money. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply through my nose. There was no mistake. This wasn't just infidelity. This was fraud. I needed more. I needed proof that I could use against her. I needed to find Marcus. The next morning, Ryan noticed the tension in my face before I even said a word. He studied me carefully as we sat at the breakfast table, his spoon hovering over his cereal. You didn't sleep, did you? he asked. I shook my head, sipping my coffee. Had some things to look into. His brows furrowed. About Mom? I hesitated, debating how much to tell him. He deserved honesty, but he had already carried so much weight on his shoulders. Yeah, I admitted finally. Turns out, she wasn't just cheating. She was also moving money around. A lot of it. Ryan's jaw tightened. I knew she was bad, but I didn't think she'd do that. I reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on his wrist. It's not your burden to carry, son. I'm handling it. He swallowed hard, nodding. But there was something in his expression that told me he was struggling with this, with the idea that his mother wasn't just a liar, but a thief. I changed the subject, steering the conversation toward school, making sure he left the house with his head clear. But once he was gone, I picked up my phone and called Adam. He answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. What do you have? I asked, grabbing my car keys and heading out to the driveway. Not just bank records, emails, messages, and I tracked Marcus's location. He still works at that real estate firm downtown. I paused by the driver's side door. You think he'll talk? Adam scoffed. Oh, he'll talk. He just doesn't know it yet. By noon, I was parked outside Marcus's office building, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel. I had debated whether to go in unannounced or call first, but I didn't want to give him a chance to run. I wanted to see his face when he realized his little secret was out in the open. I walked inside, my heart pounding but my face unreadable. The receptionist barely glanced at me as she pointed me toward his office. The moment I stepped through the doorway, Marcus's head snapped up from his desk. For a second, he looked almost happy to see me, like old friends reuniting after time apart. Then his smile faltered, and his hands dropped from his keyboard. Sam, he greeted, his voice uncertain. I closed the door behind me, taking slow, deliberate steps toward his desk. Long time, Marcus. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. What brings you here? I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence Adam had sent me. I turned the screen toward him, watching as his face paled. Recognize these? I asked coolly. His eyes darted across the images, bank statements, emails, messages between him and Julia. Proof of everything. Sam, listen, he started, but I cut him off. No, you listen, I said, my voice low and controlled. You were my friend. I let you into my home, and you repaid me by sleeping with my wife and stealing from me? Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It wasn't like that. Don't insult me, I snapped. I have everything I need. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly how much you knew, exactly how long this has been going on, and then you're going to help me take her down. Or I swear to God, I'll make sure you go down with her. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but I leaned forward, resting both palms on his desk. Choose wisely, Marcus. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he exhaled shakily and nodded. Okay, he murmured. I'll tell you everything. I stood up straight, my jaw tightening. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But I was one step closer to making them both pay. I sat across from Marcus, watching the sweat bead at his temple. His hands fidgeted with his phone, but he didn't dare look at me. He knew there was no escape from this conversation. He had been caught, and now he had to decide whether to save himself or go down with Julia. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on his desk, my voice calm but firm. Start talking. He swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. Look, Sam, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Didn't mean to sleep with my wife? Didn't mean to steal my money? Which part exactly was an accident, Marcus? His lips parted, but he had no answer. He was trapped, and he knew it. I decided to push further. How long? He hesitated before exhaling shakily. 2 years. I clenched my jaw. 2 years. 2 years of lies, of betrayal. 2 years of playing the fool while they laughed behind my back. Marcus must have seen the fire in my eyes because he quickly added, I swear, it was her idea. She told me you weren't making her happy, that she was already planning to leave. Planning to leave? I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. So why did she keep taking my money? He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Because she wanted security. She said if she was leaving, she wasn't going to start from scratch. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay seated. The urge to punch him was almost unbearable. And you went along with it, I said coldly. Marcus looked down. At first, it was just, I don't know. She told me you were a bad husband, that you didn't care about her anymore. I believed her. I scoffed. And the money? Marcus hesitated. She said it was only fair. That since she spent years with you, she deserved to take something for herself. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. I had always known Julia had a selfish streak, but this was on another level. You're going to help me, I said after a moment. Marcus blinked. What? You're going to give me everything. Emails, texts, anything that proves what she did. Otherwise, you go down with her. Panic flickered in his eyes. Sam, come on. You think I'm bluffing? I interrupted. I already have enough to ruin both of you. But if you cooperate, I'll make sure she takes the fall alone. Marcus swallowed, his leg bouncing under the desk. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He had seen the evidence on my phone. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll get you what you need. I stood up, satisfied. Good choice. As I turned to leave, I paused at the door. One more thing. Marcus looked up warily. Did she ever love you? I asked. His face crumpled for a split second before he masked it with indifference. I don't know. I nodded slowly. Figures. And with that, I walked out, leaving him to drown in the same betrayal he had helped create. That evening, I sat in my parents' living room, my laptop open, scrolling through the emails Marcus had forwarded. It was worse than I had imagined. Julia hadn't just stolen money from me. She had planned it meticulously. There were emails to financial advisors, discussions about investments, plans for property she wanted to buy. And then there were the messages between her and Marcus. They mocked me, laughed at how easy it was, called me naive, stupid. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. It took everything in me not to throw my laptop across the room. Dad? I turned to see Ryan standing in the doorway, his expression cautious. I forced myself to relax. Yeah, son? He stepped forward, eyeing my screen. You found something, didn't you? I hesitated, but there was no point hiding it. I turned the laptop toward him. Ryan read the messages, his face darkening. She stole from you? He asked, his voice shaking with anger. I nodded. Yeah. His hands balled into fists. I can't believe this. I can't believe he stopped, taking a deep breath. She's not going to get away with it, right? I shook my head. No, she's not. Ryan met my eyes, something fierce and determined in his gaze. Good. I closed the laptop. Go get some sleep. I'll handle the rest. He hesitated before nodding. All right. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. As he walked away, I turned back to the laptop, my mind already working on the next step. Julia thought she could take everything from me. She thought she could walk away unscathed. But she had underestimated me, and soon, she was going to regret it. Marcus wasn't a strong man. That much had been obvious from the moment I confronted him. He was a coward, willing to throw Julia under the bus the second he realized the walls were closing in. But that was exactly what I needed. His emails, text messages, and financial records painted an undeniable picture of deceit. Julia had been siphoning money for years, moving it into accounts she kept under Marcus's name, likely to hide it from me in case of an audit or legal scrutiny. But now, I had everything I needed to dismantle the illusion she had built for herself. It was time to make my move. I arranged a meeting with Marcus at a small cafe downtown. It was one of those quiet places that businessmen used for casual meetings, where no one paid much attention to who was talking in the corner booth. When I arrived, he was already there, tapping his fingers against the table, his knee bouncing nervously. When he saw me, he forced a weak smile. Sam. I slid into the seat across from him, fixing him with a stare. Did you bring everything? He nodded quickly and pulled out a manila folder. It's all here. Bank statements, email threads, even some of the wire transfer confirmations she made. I opened the folder, and skimmed through the documents. The transactions were all there. Consistent withdrawals from our joint account, funds moved into Marcus's name, and then funneled elsewhere. But it was the emails that were most damning. Julia, don't worry, he's too stupid to notice. I'll move it slowly. Marcus, what if he finds out? Julia, he won't. And if he does, I'll play the victim. He always falls for it. I clenched my jaw, my nails pressing into the table. She had played me like a fool, used my trust against me, and now she still had the audacity to act like I owed her something. Marcus cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Look, I know I messed up, all right? But I was just what? I cut him off. Greedy? Spineless? A willing accomplice? His face flushed. I thought she loved me, man. I really did. I let out a cold laugh. She used you, just like she used me. And now you're stuck cleaning up the mess? Marcus ran a hand through his hair. So what now? Are you going to the police? I leaned back, considering him. Not yet. He blinked. What do you mean, not yet? I folded my arms. I want her to suffer first. She took everything from me. Now I want to take everything from her. Marcus hesitated. And what do you want me to do? I studied him for a moment. You're going to help me ruin her. That night, I sat in my parents' house, poring over every detail of the evidence Marcus had given me. I had options now: legal action, public exposure, financial retaliation. But I wanted to be smart about this. Julia was a manipulator. If I wasn't careful, she would spin this in her favor, paint herself as the victim, and somehow land on her feet. I wasn't going to let that happen. Ryan walked into the living room and saw the papers spread out across the table. His eyes darkened as he realized what they were. More proof? He asked. Yeah, I said, rubbing my temples. It's worse than we thought. He walked over and picked up one of the emails, reading it in silence. After a few seconds, he clenched his jaw. She's disgusting. I sighed. Yeah. Ryan looked up at me. What are you going to do? I met his gaze. Expose her. His brows furrowed. How? A slow smile formed on my lips. She thinks she's untouchable. She still believes she can manipulate her way out of this. So I'm going to make sure everyone sees the truth, where it hurts her the most. Ryan nodded, his expression serious. I want to help. I hesitated. Ryan. No, he cut me off. She lied to both of us. She took from you, but she also abandoned me. I want to be part of this. I studied him for a moment, seeing not just my son, but a young man who had been hurt, who wanted justice. He had been collateral damage in all of this, and maybe it was time he had a say. All right, I said. We do this together. The perfect opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. A charity fundraiser was coming up, an event Julia had been organizing for months. It was her way of keeping up appearances, of proving to the world that she was a respected woman in the community. She would be surrounded by donors, executives, and her carefully curated social circle. It was the perfect place to tear her facade apart. Ryan and I arrived at the venue early, blending into the crowd. The room was decorated in gold and white, with servers walking around with champagne glasses. Julia was there, dressed in an expensive evening gown, laughing, shaking hands, acting as though she hadn't ruined lives. Marcus arrived soon after, his face pale. He had agreed to be there, to be part of the takedown. Ryan nudged me. Are you ready? I nodded. Let's end this. As Julia stepped up to the stage to make her opening speech, I walked to the back of the room where the projector was set up. The moment she began speaking, I connected my phone to the system. And then, I hit play. On the large screen behind her, the emails, the bank transactions, the text messages, all of it appeared, one after the other. The audience gasped, whispers rippling through the crowd. Julia turned, her face draining of color. What is this? She stammered. I stepped forward, my voice loud and clear. The truth, Julia. The truth about how you stole from me, how you used me, how you manipulated everyone. The room fell into stunned silence. Julia's face twisted in horror. Sam, you. But she had no defense. The evidence was there for everyone to see. And I was finally free. The silence in the room was suffocating. The screen behind Julia still displayed her messages, the damning evidence of her betrayal, her theft, her manipulations. Every guest at the fundraiser had seen it, had read her own words, her own plans to drain me financially while she paraded around as a successful, independent woman. She turned toward me, her face pale but her eyes burning with fury. "You did this?" Her voice shook, though whether it was from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. I stepped forward, adjusting the microphone so my voice carried through the stunned crowd. "Yes, Julia, I did this. You've been lying to everyone for years. You stole from me, manipulated me, and abandoned your own son." I gestured to Ryan, who stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "But you were stupid enough to leave a trail." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some of Julia's friends had already begun to edge away from her, distancing themselves now that her mask had been ripped away. A few whispered, their eyes darting between the screen and Julia, trying to process the truth. I turned my gaze to Marcus, who stood awkwardly near the back of the room. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I had forced him to show up tonight, not to protect Julia, but to be a witness to her downfall. Julia finally snapped out of her shock and turned to the audience, her voice laced with desperation. "This is all a lie. Sam is bitter. He's making this up to ruin me." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You really think anyone is going to believe you?" I gestured toward the screen. "Those are your words, Julia. Your bank statements. Your transactions. Your betrayal." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. One of the board members of the charity, a well-respected woman named Diane, stepped forward, arms crossed over her chest. "Julia," she said, her tone sharp, "is this true?" Julia's face twisted. I. Diane turned to me. "Mr. Parker, is this legal evidence?" I nodded. "All of it. Emails, texts, bank records. If anyone wants to verify it, be my guest." That was all it took. The audience shifted again, their expressions hardening as they realized the truth. Julia looked around, realizing she had no allies left. Even Brenda, her mother, who had been standing at the edge of the room, looked away as if she were embarrassed to be associated with her own daughter. "You planned this," Julia hissed, taking a step toward me. I stood my ground. "Yes, just like you planned to destroy me." Her jaw clenched, but before she could say another word, two men in suits pushed through the crowd. My lawyer and a financial investigator. "Julia Morris," the investigator said, holding up a file. "We need to have a conversation about your financial activities." Her face crumpled. "Wait, this isn't fair." I tilted my head. "You stole from me, Julia, and now the consequences are here." The lawyer handed her a document. "You're being sued for fraudulent transfers, theft, and financial misconduct. You'll be required to account for every dollar taken from your joint accounts with Mr. Parker." Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. Then, in a final act of desperation, she spun toward Marcus. You told him, didn't you?" Marcus raised his hands. "Julia, Shut up," she shrieked. "You were supposed to be on my side." Marcus swallowed hard. "I had no choice." Julia laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You coward." I stepped closer. "That's funny coming from you." She turned to me, her eyes filled with something almost like regret. "Sam, please." I shook my head. "There's no coming back from this, Julia. You lost." The investigator motioned toward the door. "We need to continue this discussion at our office." Julia looked like she was about to argue, but she knew it was pointless. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked small. As she was escorted out, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Ryan walked up beside me. "She's finally gone," he murmured. I looked down at him and nodded. "Yeah, she is." For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Marcus turned toward me, shoving his hands into his pockets. "So, what happens to me?" I studied him, considering. "That depends." His brow furrowed. "On what?" I crossed my arms. "On whether you stay out of my life. If I never see you again, I won't push for charges against you." He swallowed, nodding. Fair enough. Without another word, he turned and left. I looked back at Ryan, who was watching me carefully. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, I think so. As we stepped outside into the night air, I put my arm around his shoulders. We did it, son, I said softly. He nodded, exhaling deeply. Yeah, we did. And for the first time in years, I knew we were finally free. The drive home was quiet. Not the kind of suffocating silence that had once filled our home when Julia was around, but a peaceful one. A silence that meant something had finally ended. Ryan sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, his face reflecting the passing streetlights. He hadn't said much since we left the fundraiser. I knew he had a lot on his mind. I did too. Tonight had changed everything. I kept my eyes on the road. You okay? Ryan blinked, as if I had pulled him from his thoughts. Yeah, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. I knew better than to push. He would talk when he was ready. So I just nodded and let the quiet settle again. When we pulled into the driveway, the house felt different. Lighter, somehow. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, we weren't living under the weight of Julia's lies. Maybe it was because I had finally done something to take back control. Ryan hesitated at the front door. Dad? I turned to him, unlocking the door. Yeah. He exhaled. What happens now? I stepped inside, tossing my keys on the kitchen counter. Now? I repeated, thinking for a moment. Now, we move on. Ryan followed me in, rubbing the back of his neck. Do you think she'll go to jail? I sighed. That depends. If she has enough money hidden away to pay back what she stole, she might avoid it. If not, well, she'll have to face the consequences. He sat on one of the stools at the kitchen island. And Marcus? I poured myself a glass of water. Marcus is a coward. He'll disappear. He's not the type to fight back when the odds aren't in his favor. Ryan was quiet for a moment before shaking his head. I still can't believe she did all of that. Like, I knew she was selfish, but stealing from you? Talking about you like that? He clenched his jaw. I don't get how someone can be that evil. I took a slow sip of water, choosing my words carefully. Some people think the world owes them something. Julia was one of them. She didn't love anyone but herself, Ryan. She was willing to use whoever she could to get what she wanted, even her own family. Ryan's fists clenched. I don't ever want to be like her. I set my glass down and placed a hand on his shoulder. You won't be. You've got a good heart, son. And now, you don't have to be under her shadow anymore. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. Yeah, I guess you're right. For the first time in a long while, I saw something in him that had been missing for years. A sense of peace. A sense of freedom. I patted his shoulder. Get some rest. We've got a fresh start ahead of us. Ryan yawned and stretched. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. As he went upstairs, I leaned against the counter, letting out a long breath. It was over. Really over. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. No weight pressing on my chest. No lingering anger festering in my mind. I made breakfast, humming softly to myself as I flipped pancakes. It felt good, normal. Like how life should have always been. Ryan came downstairs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He sniffed the air and grinned. Are we celebrating something? I smirked, plating a pancake. Maybe. Maybe I just felt like making breakfast for my son. He sat at the table, grabbing a fork. I'm not complaining. As we ate, I decided to bring up something I had been thinking about. I was thinking we should take a trip. Ryan raised an eyebrow. A trip? I nodded. Yeah, just us. Somewhere new. Somewhere that doesn't remind us of the past. His eyes lit up. That actually sounds really good. I smiled. Good. Because I already started looking at places. Ryan chuckled. You're serious about this, huh? I leaned back. Dead serious. We deserve it. He nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Yeah, we do. For the first time, it really felt like we were moving forward. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Adam. Sam, he said, his voice even. Got an update for you. I tensed slightly. What is it? Julia's lawyer is scrambling. She's trying to negotiate a deal to avoid jail time, but the case is strong. She'll either have to pay everything back or serve time. I let out a slow breath. Good. There's more, Adam added. Marcus moved out of the city. Looks like he's trying to lay low. I smirked. Typical. Adam chuckled. Figured you'd say that. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. Thanks, Adam. For everything. Anytime, man. As I hung up, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. This was it. The end of Julia's control over my life. I walked outside, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the sun on my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't carrying the weight of betrayal. I wasn't waiting for the next storm. I was finally free. And that was worth everything. The days after Julia's public downfall were strangely quiet. It was as if, for the first time in years, my life wasn't dictated by chaos. There were no manipulative phone calls, no veiled threats about alimony, no surprise visits from Brenda trying to guilt-trip me into submission. The silence was peaceful. Ryan and I settled into a rhythm, one that felt normal, something we hadn't had in a long time. He went to school, I worked on rebuilding my finances, and we both focused on moving forward. But despite everything, I knew Julia wasn't done. She never went down without a fight, and even though she was backed into a corner, she'd claw her way out if she found a weak spot. And I wasn't about to give her one. It was late in the evening when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I already knew who it was before I even answered. Sam, Julia's voice came through, quieter than usual. I exhaled, walking onto the back porch. What do you want, Julia? I don't know. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the darkening sky. Yeah, you do. You always know what you want. So say it. She hesitated. For the first time, she didn't sound sure of herself. I never thought it would come to this. I scoffed. What? You never thought your lies would catch up to you? That stealing from me, betraying me, would have consequences? Her breath hitched. I was just trying to survive, Sam. I gritted my teeth. Survive? You weren't surviving, Julia. You were thriving at my expense. You took everything you could, and when it wasn't enough, you kept digging deeper. Don't act like you were some helpless victim. She was silent for a long moment. Are you happy now? I laughed, cold and sharp. You mean now that you've lost? Now that everyone knows the truth? Yeah, Julia. I'm happy. She sighed, the weight of everything finally settling in. They're going to freeze my accounts, Sam. I have nothing left. I closed my eyes. I knew what was coming next. Please, she whispered. Just help me fix this. I felt a flicker of something. Pity, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it came. You want my help? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Where was your help when I was drowning? When I was struggling to pick up the pieces of my life while you and Marcus were laughing behind my back? Sam, please. No, I cut her off. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. She let out a shuddering breath. I don't know what to do. I shook my head. That's not my problem. And then, for the first time in my life, I hung up on her without a second thought. I stood on the porch for a long time, staring out into the darkness, letting the finality of it settle in. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even relieved. I just felt done. It was over. Truly over. I walked back inside to find Ryan sitting on the couch, flipping through a book. He looked up when he saw me, noticing the expression on my face. Was that her? I nodded. Ryan frowned. What did she want? I sat down across from him, resting my elbows on my knees. She wanted my help. He blinked, then let out a bitter laugh. Seriously? Yep. Ryan shook his head. Unbelievable. I studied him for a moment. What would you have done? He sighed, setting his book down. I don't know. I guess part of me thinks we should just forget about her and move on. But the other part of me wants her to suffer for what she did. I nodded. Yeah, I get that. He hesitated. Are we really done with her? I leaned back against the couch. Yes, son, we are. Ryan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling between us. But for the first time, It didn't feel heavy. It felt like a door had finally shut, locking out the past. I glanced over at him. Still up for that trip? His face lit up. Yeah, more than ever. I smiled. Then let's start planning. We pulled out my laptop and spent the next hour looking at places. Beaches, mountains, cities, places that didn't remind us of our past life. Somewhere new. Somewhere that belonged to us. As we laughed over terrible hotel reviews and debated the best destinations, I realized something. We had one. Not just against Julia, but against everything she had done to us. And that was the best victory of all. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. For the first time in years, Ryan and I had something to look forward to. Something that wasn't tangled up in court hearings, financial battles, or Julia's endless manipulations. The morning after Julia's call, I had made a decision. I wasn't just going to move on. I was going to start over. Ryan and I sat at the dining table, the laptop open between us, scrolling through flights and accommodations. How about here? Ryan pointed at a coastal town with bright blue waters and white sandy beaches. I smirked. You really want a beach vacation? He shrugged. I mean, yeah. We've never actually gone anywhere just for fun. That hit me harder than I expected. He was right. All our past trips had been out of obligation. Family events, work-related getaways, or forced vacations where Julia spent more time on her phone than with us. All right, I said, nodding. The beach it is. Ryan grinned, and for the first time in a long while, I saw him excited about something. It wasn't just about leaving. It was about escaping the weight of everything we'd been through. We booked the tickets that night, and for the first time, our future didn't feel like a battlefield. The night before our flight, I sat in my room, staring at my packed suitcase. It was surreal, knowing that in a few hours, I'd be on a plane, leaving everything behind. Not forever, but long enough to breathe. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it instinctively, expecting it to be Ryan or a travel update. But the number on the screen made my stomach turn. Julia. I stared at it, my jaw tightening. She had tried calling twice yesterday, and I had ignored both attempts. She had sent messages, too, but I hadn't bothered reading them. I had nothing left to say to her. The phone rang, and finally, it stopped. A moment later, a voicemail notification popped up. I considered ignoring it, but something in me, curiosity, closure, maybe both, made me press play. Her voice came through, quiet and strained. Sam, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. I was wrong, she continued, about everything. She exhaled shakily. I always thought I was in control. I thought I could twist things in my favor. But now I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my friends. I don't even have a place to stay. I clenched my jaw. I know you don't owe me anything, she went on. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I don't know how to fix this. Her voice cracked. I miss Ryan. I shut my eyes. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but can I see him? Just once. Silence followed. Then a quiet, goodbye, Sam. The message ended. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. After everything, she still thought she had a right to Ryan. A right to anything. But did she? I exhaled sharply, setting my phone down. I needed to think. The next morning, I found Ryan in the living room, his suitcase by the door. He looked up as I walked in, stretching his arms over his head. Ready? He asked. I hesitated. There's something I need to tell you first. His expression shifted, instantly wary. What? I sat down across from him. Your mother called me last night. Ryan stiffened. What did she want? I hesitated, then told him everything. Her message, her regrets, her request to see him. Ryan's face darkened, his jaw tightening. She wants to see me now? After everything? His voice was sharp, almost disbelieving. Where was she when I needed her? Where was she when she was stealing from you and throwing us away? I swallowed. I know, son, but it's your choice. I won't make it for you. Ryan looked away, his fingers drumming against his knee. I gave him time, waiting as he processed everything. Finally, he let out a slow breath. No. I nodded. You sure? His eyes met mine, steady and determined. Yeah. She doesn't deserve to see me now just because she lost everything. If she really cared, she would have acted like a mother when it mattered. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. He wasn't making his decision out of anger. He was making it because he knew his worth. All right, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Then we leave without looking back. Ryan nodded, standing up. Let's get out of here. I grabbed my suitcase, opened the front door, and together, we stepped out into a world that finally belonged to us. The airport was busy, but for once, the chaos didn't feel stressful. It felt exciting. Ryan and I moved through security, checked our bags, and made our way to the gate. As we sat waiting, he turned to me. This feels weird. I raised an eyebrow. Weird how? He thought for a moment. I don't know. It's like, for so long, everything was about Mom. Fighting her, dealing with her drama, getting over what she did. And now that she's not in our lives, it's just quiet. I nodded, understanding completely. Yeah, it is. Ryan tilted his head. Is that a good thing? I smiled. It's the best thing. He grinned. Yeah, I think so too. The final boarding call came, and we grabbed our bags, stepping toward the gate. As we handed over our tickets, I glanced at my phone one last time. One unread message. From Julia. I didn't open it. Instead, I turned off my phone, put it in my pocket, and stepped onto the plane. A fresh start. A new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. The plane lifted off the runway, and as I stared out the window, watching the city shrink beneath us, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a trip. This was freedom. This was leaving behind every last piece of Julia's influence, every scar she had carved into my life, every ounce of pain she had inflicted on Ryan. Ryan sat beside me, earbuds in, flipping through the in-flight entertainment. His shoulders weren't tense anymore. His face wasn't shadowed by worry. He looked happy, and that, more than anything, told me I had made the right decision. We were finally free. For the first hour of the flight, I let my thoughts drift. I had spent so long reacting to Julia's destruction, first during our marriage, then after the divorce, and finally, through the chaos of exposing her crimes. Now, for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was moving forward. A flight attendant stopped by with refreshments, and as I took my drink, I caught Ryan watching me. What's up? I asked, taking a sip. He hesitated. Do you think she's really gone? Like, from our lives for good? I exhaled, setting the cup down on my tray. Legally? Not yet. She's still got to deal with the lawsuit. But personally? Yeah. She's gone, Ryan. He nodded slowly. It still feels weird. I studied him. You don't regret not seeing her, do you? His expression darkened slightly, but then he shook his head. No, I don't. I guess part of me still doesn't get it. How she could just be like that. How she could care more about money and Marcus than us. I looked at my son, at the boy who had been forced to grow up too fast because of Julia's selfishness. He deserved so much more than what she gave him. Some people don't know how to love, Ryan, I said after a moment. They only know how to take. Your mom was one of them. Ryan let out a breath. Yeah, I see that now. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. I just want to stop thinking about her. I smiled slightly. Then don't. Think about the ocean. Think about all the food we're about to eat. Think about how, for the first time in a long time, we don't have to look over our shoulders. Ryan cracked an eye open, smirking. All right. The food part got me. I chuckled, ruffling his hair before settling back into my seat. For the rest of the flight, I let myself stop thinking about Julia. I let myself stop wondering if she would find a way to crawl back into our lives. Because I knew, deep down, that she couldn't. She had lost. And I had won. The resort was breathtaking. White sand beaches, crystal clear water, the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore. The moment we arrived, Ryan's entire demeanor changed. He was grinning, his shoulders loose, his excitement barely contained. Dad, he said as we stepped onto the beach for the first time. We should have done this a long time ago. I exhaled, feeling the warm ocean breeze against my skin. Yeah, we should have. The next few days were unlike anything we had ever experienced together. We went snorkeling, ate our weight in seafood, and spent hours just sitting on the beach, watching the sunset. One night, as we walked along the shore, Ryan turned to me. You ever think about dating again? The question caught me off guard. I glanced at him. Why do you ask? He shrugged, kicking at the sand. I don't know. You've spent so much time dealing with Mom and everything she did. He hesitated. I think you deserve to be happy too. I smiled at him. I am happy, son. He gave me a knowing look. I mean, yeah, but like, really happy. I chuckled. I don't know, Ryan. Maybe one day. Right now, I just want to focus on us. On this new chapter. He nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. We walked in silence for a while, the waves lapping at our feet. You think she regrets it? Ryan asked suddenly. I didn't have to ask who he meant. Maybe, I admitted, but I don't care if she does. Ryan looked at me, surprised. I continued, regret doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo what she did. It doesn't erase the years she took from us. And it sure as hell doesn't mean she deserves a second chance. Ryan considered that before nodding. Yeah, you're right. I put an arm around his shoulders, squeezing lightly. We don't need to worry about her anymore. We've got our own lives to live now. Ryan leaned into my side for a second before pulling away, grinning. So, you gonna race me back to the hotel? I smirked. You think you can win? Obviously. I laughed. All right, kid. Let's see what you've got. And just like that, we ran, the past finally behind us. A few weeks later, we were back home, but everything felt different. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. There was no shadow of Julia lurking in the corners, no tension waiting to explode. One afternoon, as I was sorting through paperwork, I got a final update from Adam. Adam, it's over. Julia's settled. She paid back what she could, but she's broke now. She lost her job, lost her reputation. She's out of the picture. I stared at the message for a long moment before exhaling. I had spent so long chasing justice, making sure she paid for what she did. And now that it was done, I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just peace. I texted back. Me, good. Now we can move on. And we did. Ryan thrived in school. I rebuilt my finances, my life. The future stretched ahead of us, bright and open. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the trees, Ryan turned to me. You happy, Dad? I smiled, watching the colors streak across the sky. Yes, son, I said. I really am. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it.